If you're an early stage entrepreneur looking for investment, this could be the most important video that you watch. Imagine raising funds without a clear understanding of your money mindset. It is a recipe for regret, trust me. Today we have Jennifer Love, an award-winning 5X career entrepreneur, speaker, money therapist, and business advisor. With over 20 years of experience in human and organizational behavior, she basically helps entrepreneurs uncover and overcome money blocks at any stage, no matter what stage you're at. Everybody's got stuff to deal with, right? It's a complex relationship with money. This is absolutely vital when seeking funding for your business. So Jennifer has been featured in Forbes, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, and Intuit. She is a total powerhouse. Let's dive in and learn from the best. Okay, Jennifer Love, so good to see you. So good to have you here. Welcome to Seed Money. How you doing today?
Oh my goodness. I'm well. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I think we've got a couple of juicy stories to share with those who are listening.
Yeah, I love your background. I think this is going to be incredibly valuable because you not only you bring this combination of like psychology background, the tactical hands-on experience of doing it yourself, and having coached a ton of entrepreneurs through the process. So it's like you've seen it from all angles.
Lived it, seen it, done it, yeah. Helped others,
survived it, we could say,
right.
But it's just it's so complex too, and that's one of the focuses here is to really talk about the more human side of what it's like to raise money.
Yeah,
and I think you really, zero in on that. So I'd love to start off, just tell us about like your experience raising money yourself, and all the good and challenges that came with that.
Well, let's see. I mean, I've been a career entrepreneur and had lots of twists and turns, and I've started a few companies at that time where I've advised others in kind of getting started in their companies. And so a lot of fundraising in the process of some of those. And I think the last calculation, this was about 7 years ago that I did in terms of how much money I'd been involved in helping to raise or raised myself. Was well over 100 million. And I mean, that might seem a lot to some, and it's not a lot to others, but it's enough to have me sit in the meatiness of what this is like, and the journey of fundraising and, for product companies, and even some service-based businesses too. And it's a real thing, and it's a real, and it was a real thing. It was real special, 10, 15 years ago, raising money as a woman founder, and doing so in the food space. And so I have a wholesale chocolate company that I co-founded with a business partner, in 2009. And, we were rocking it. We were in New York City, 2 chicks in a kitchen making chocolate. And, and, I was handling the sales and the financing, kind of the business logistics side. And she was handling the operations and the manufacturing side. And, we got some real traction, and we were doing quite well pretty fast, proved feasibility within really 12 months. And so it was time to scale. And anyone who knows anything about a product company, especially in the food space, it's a money pit. You have to put a lot of money in to scale fairly quickly. And so we did a friends and family round, 250,000. And that was great. That helped us get to the next level and stage of growth. And then we went to do our first really Series A round. I came from a business planning background as well as a psychology background, and was marrying those two things together. So I knew how to write a business plan. I knew how to write a financial model. I can do those things. It's funny. I laugh now. I'm like a spreadsheet queen, but I don't really enjoy it. I can write the whole model, like how it all can, like the algebra, like I can see it, but like I don't want to sit down. That's not where my strength is. We can have superpowers that we don't really enjoy. But it can put it all together. And we did, I spent a great deal of time really preparing, really thinking through how can we scale, by reducing the economics and some of the expenses by purchasing in bulk. And, if we did this, then that, and who do we need to hire? And like really mapping that all out completely, putting a lot of energy and effort into that. and then lining up some investor meetings. And oh my goodness, Jayla, the very first meeting that we went into, this little Australian dude, and I'm tall, I'm like 5'9", I'm a substantial woman, and then put me in heels and I'm like towering, like I'm like an Amazon queen, right? So, and this little short Australian dude. And so my business partner and I, we go and meet him for lunch, and we have done all this deep preparation, and I'm ready for the conversation. I'm ready for the questions, and all he wants to do is tell my business partner that she's too skinny and that his wife is too fat and that I'm just perfect.
Oh my God, you got to be kidding me.
Then he tries to dismiss my business partner from the meeting. And we're sitting there. I mean, it was a moment of trauma, actually. It was shocking. And we both were like stunned. And we weren't prepared for it. We didn't, and I don't think we were prepared in ourselves emotionally or psychologically. We certainly weren't prepared on how to have that conversation or what to do with it. So she dismissed herself and went to the bathroom for a moment to collect herself. And I just sat there with this douchebag. And, we, of course, we're like, let's get out of this lunch and let's leave. And he's texting me, trying to convince me to go back to his office with him. And it was disgusting, actually, was what it was. And so we get back to her apartment in New York City, and we're at the doorstep. Her then fiance, now husband, was in the world of finance. And so she had the story, like we all have money stories. We all run a relationship with money in different ways. And hers at the time was, and sounded a little bit like, oh my goodness, I don't want him to know about this, because if he does, then he won't want us to go out and continue meeting with other, men, because he knows what they're like. Right. So she's like, let's not tell him. And my story sounded like, oh my goodness, I don't want us to be considered as being dramatic. Or if we shine a light on all of this, then, people are going to think that we don't have what it takes as women in business. So we both agreed on her doorstep before we walked up to her apartment that we were going to sweep it under the rug and we were never going to talk about this again. And that's what happened. So, okay, well, that's one option. And let me just share the impact of what that created. Here we are, because that experience, traumatic experience, like we're like, let's pretend that never happened. So we still need to go out and continue fundraising. And so we do. We get into other meetings with other investors. And we were pretty actively pursued by a few investor groups. One of them, which, we ended up sitting down in a deal with, and I'll never forget this. I was sitting at the conference table, kind of looked like, you're at this big, like, executive board meeting, like you would imagine sitting, in some kind of a board meeting, or signing the documents. And I'm sitting there and I'm having a moment because I'm in full recognition that I'm absolutely signing our value away. Because the story, again, perpetuated, because we didn't have the conversations, because we didn't process what was happening. What ended up perpetuating from that was, this is the best that we can do as women in business. So I just have to take this shitty deal.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we did. And we ended up, I'm grateful for the funding. I'm grateful for, where Nipmore has gotten to, and it's still thriving today. But we completely undervalued ourselves in that process, in that deal. And it stemmed from that unprocessed, not having that appropriate conversation, not dealing with what happens in a healthy way, created a significant impact that literally took money out of our pockets. And so, a couple years after that whole experience, I ended up stepping out of the CEO position of the chocolate company and said, man, if I'm amongst the top 3% of women entrepreneurs that are getting to, millions of dollars in revenue and able to get millions of dollars in funding, and this is still my experience, I mean, I got to do something about this. I got to go clean this. I got to go clean up my own relationship with money. And I want to. I don't have to, but I want to clean up my own relationship. I want to clear this out. I want to sit in the seat of my own value. And I want to help other people do this too. And I knew that based on my psychological background that I could. And so that's, that was really what ended up happening. And I have. And I really got to this recognition that when it comes to money, if I'm not valuing myself, no one else is going to either. And so it's really my responsibility to have the bold conversations, to have the uncomfortable conversations with myself or with my partner or with an investor or with whomever in my life about money. Because when we have those important conversations, and they can be a little uncomfortable, it allows us to sit in the truth of our value and make ourselves matter in that process so that we're not leaving money out of our pockets.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is just crazy. I mean, one, we know the unfortunate part is you're not alone in that scenario that you went through at all, right?
It's
so common.
Super common. And I came to really realize over the last, 15 years, most every woman entrepreneur that I have talked to who has been out fundraising has had some kind of, maybe not that kind of exact experience, but a similar experience. And that is really unfortunate that it is that prevalent.
Yeah, it's funny. I talked about this in an earlier episode, but my version of that, which I really didn't realize until down the road, was this guy was getting ready to write a check. I'd probably met with him, half a dozen times. And then he looks at me and he says, well, if you get pregnant, I'm going to lose my investment. And I remember being stunned and just like, wait, why are you, what? Like, real, that I'm not even thinking about that. Like, and what that, so I swept it under the rug, didn't think about it, didn't mention it to anybody. But it crept into my subconscious, and fast forward, however many years later, when I'm having a son with my business, and in my head, I'm going, how am I going to be a mom and run a business?
Yeah.
Like it, and it really, so yeah, I don't know, that is just crazy. So what would you say, I guess, like, how do you recommend? So the fundraising process is brutal, right? People say all kinds of crap, like crazy stuff you can't even imagine. How do you recommend for people to, acknowledge it, process it so that it doesn't fester and creep in and, get them, come back to haunt them a little bit down the road?
I think that, in hindsight, I've learned a lot since 2010. Here we are, 2024. And then I've learned a lot since then, and the reflection, and also helping a lot of other people, kind of navigate this. I think one of the most important things that you can do, certainly you need to prepare, and, the preparation of like getting clear about your strategy and, why, your why, and your wealthy why with your own life, but, your good life number, and for your business, like, why do you need this funding? And certainly you need to do all of that kind of work. Yes. But, and also, like, when we're getting to, like, as you're saying, more of this human side of it, like, what are your values? And so sitting in the seat of, who, like, choosing up front before you even go into that investor, I call it investor dating.
Mhm.
Right? Like, we would never in a million years to choose to marry someone who treated us like that. Right? I mean, I hope for most of us, we get clear about what we want in a partner, but we can do the same in terms of investors. And so getting clear about, like, hey, what do I value? What's important to me? What kind of relationship do I want to have with the investors in my business? And so getting clear about that up front then becomes a bit of a filtration system for who you attract in and who you're even willing to sit down and have a conversation with. Um, and so I think that becomes an important process up front before even getting into having a meeting with investors, because listen, it's evolved a lot since
Mhm.
2010.
Thank goodness, mostly.
The whole Me Too movement had certainly
Yeah.
helped a lot.
Mhm.
And certainly the pendulum swung, and we need balance in all things. But we need a voice to things too, and a spotlight on things. And it is our responsibility as women to speak up, um, and to do so in the moment. And that's part of our own inner work. And there's this book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello, and he has this quote. I'm just going to read it here. I brought it because I was like, I think this feels relevant to this conversation. And he writes in his book, "You may not want to look, because if you do, you may just change. You may not want to look. If you look, you lose control of the life that you so precariously are holding together. To wake up, to become aware, the one thing you need the most is the readiness to learn something new. And the chances you will become aware are in direct proportion to the amount of truth you can take without running away." Now, why do I bring this in? I bring this in because I think we as women going out into raise money have a deep responsibility to be prepared in ourselves, right? To have the confidence, the clarity, the acumen in ourselves to know the truth of what's running us, our own sense of value. Are we making ourselves matter or not? And in what ways are we making ourselves matter or not? Are we valuing ourselves? Because again, I'm going to say it again, when it comes to money, if we're not valuing ourselves, we can't expect that other people will. And so we need to take a look at the deeper truth of what's happening. We know from the research around money and the psychology of money, that 90% of our financial decisions are made based on our emotions. So we need to be checking out our emotions and the truth of what's happening in there. We also know, based on the research, that for the majority of us, that it's fear, anger, and shame that we're associating in terms of our relationship with money. Fidelity, was it last year or 2 years ago? They did a research study on the top word that women or versus men associate with money. More than 50% of women associate the word stress with money.
Oh, wow. Crazy.
Versus men, where their word is hope.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
So again, I just come back to, hey, ladies, we can do this. But
yeah.
we got to check the truth of what's going on inside of ourselves out, because when we do, we, instead of being victims to the circumstances of our life or situations, we become empowered, because we are fierce and strong, sitting in the seat of our truth and the boldness of who we are, valuing ourselves at our deepest core, knowing that our experience, our emotional experience, our mental experience, our experience matters. And it doesn't mean that we need to be a bitch. It just means that we need to speak the truth, and we can do that with grace. We can do that with absolute truth and check out and have the conversations that we need to do, knowing that life is happening for and with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it comes back to Like when we go out to fundraise, let's also, yes, prepare the business and that let's prepare for who we want to be relating with, but let's make sure that the relating with ourself is super solid first and foremost. Let's invest in ourselves before we invest in anything else. Start there.
Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. And that investor is a long-term partner, so it's worth that. It's funny, I'm thinking back to my 30-year-old self at the same time, 2008, going out to raise money. And if someone told me to do that, would I have done it? You know what I mean? And I had advisors, and I feel like my a lot has come with experience and age and advisors, right? Other people really reflecting, putting the mirror in front of me. And I love that quote, because you really do have to be brave enough to look at the truth of who you are and what the situation is and areas you need to work on, which isn't always easy and can be a process. So how do you help, entrepreneurs through that process? Like, what are you, because I totally agree. It's we're so complex. It's all integrated, right? And I can see how important that work is to do up front. But I also feel like entrepreneurs are so busy and in the moment. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, I should do that. And then I don't do it. You know what I mean? And maybe that's just me, but I'm picturing like how I would have maybe reacted to that. So what do you, I guess, what are some, how have you helped kind of entrepreneurs go through the process or kind of work on some of those things?
Yeah, well, there is a little bit of an education of understanding that these things are related and they have deep impacts. So kind of business use cases become really important in sharing, because our view of money really shapes everything. Our personal relationships, our business decisions, like even our financial growth. So understanding and then refining our relationship with money helps us to make like smarter financial choices, and certainly in the fundraising process, but it also unlocks personal growth. And then that leads us to loving and enjoying our life rather than burnout or selling our soul in the process of running and growing our business as we're out raising money and continuing to utilize that, right? So let me give you a couple of examples too, and not just in the fundraising arena, but like in the impact of doing this kind of work and what it does. I have this gorgeous dragonfly that's just flying by right now. I'm like, oh my goodness, beautiful. So, I had a client that she is an event and movie producer, and we were reminiscing not too long ago about how she was really struggling to ask for what she was worth. And she was running 5,000 person conferences, entrepreneurial conferences in Canada. So like one of the biggest, events that she was running, and she had proven results, significant, but the most that she had ever asked for in sponsorship was 35,000. And so, I was like, listen, when you've got the results, it's the same effort and energy to ask for $100,000 as it is to ask for $35,000. And so for her, it was like going in and doing this work, right? Then we're talking about like checking this out. And she did. And even though she was afraid, and even though she felt a bit nauseous, she put the deck together. She met with this big, financial organization, one of the biggest in the world, and with some of their top executives that she'd like spent 6 months building the relationship with. And she like slides the deck across the table, and they're like, great, Teresa, like, how much is it to like, do this deal with you? She's like, $100,000, and she's like, cause she's like listening to what I had shared, which is like, pause, give it a pause, like take a breath, just sit in the center of yourself for a minute, knowing your value, and pause there. And she did it. And they're like, great, let's do it. She closed the deal. She turned around. She did it again 30 days later. And it really expanded her confidence and her belief in herself and going, wow, okay. So like doing this inner work really actually does show up in my bank account. Right. And so, and I like another example, I'm working with the client who when she came to me, she was really burnt out. She had taken her family business over a period of 6 years from 6 million to 25 million. So grew it really fast, but completely burnt herself out in the process because she completely sacrificed herself in the process. And so she came in and she still felt incredibly indebted to her family. So even though she was largely responsible for creating the money and making her family rich, she still felt indebted to them. And so doing this deep inner work allowed her to be like, actually, I don't want to be running the business. I don't want to be sacrificing myself. I want to untangle and get unenmeshed with my family. And she ended up stepping out of running the family business, but she negotiated consulting, like sitting on the board, preserving her salary, kept the same amount, and started building her dream home and went on to have a baby. So she sat in the same thing, like, I matter and I'm going to value myself here and I can figure this out on my terms. And in order to do that, it requires us to do that deep inner work, right? And I'll just share one more example here. And that's another client who years ago, she told me about taking out $100,000 loan for her business and not telling her husband.
Oh,
So she was in this like deep debt cycle that she just couldn't like get out of because she's like sitting in all the shame, right? But through doing this deep inner work, she got really honest with herself. And she got honest, like she ended up confessing to her husband. She helped her create a debt repayment plan. Within 6 months, she became debt free. She learned through that process that financial secrets create a really toxic environment, right? And if we're not doing that deep inner work and we're just letting all that fester, it just gets really pussy and it becomes infected and it's not doing anything right in our emotional and mental state and then how we're behaving as a result of it. But she allowed herself to be witnessed and supported in her financial struggles. And then that set her free to get out of what I call this shame sandwich, right? So when it comes to money, we often think that we need to treat the symptom, which is the behavioral thing. Oh, I'm in debt, so I'm going to like figure out how to have this repayment plan. Well, okay, that's great, except I can help you make 10 million, but if what's happening in the condition of why that symptom is expressing itself in your finances is not dealt with first, and that condition is the psychological and emotional things that are running your money relationship. If we don't deal with that, you can make 10 million and lose it twice. I had a client who did that, right? So we can make lots of money, but it doesn't matter because what's happening on the inside of us is what's running all of that. So we've got to treat the condition. We've got to treat the psychological and emotional experience and the meaning making that you're having so that those symptoms then are now not showing up because we've dealt with them. We don't want to just put a Band-Aid on it. Like I'm kind of talking in this preventative medicine kind of realm, right? Because I want people to try to understand that it's very much similar when it comes to our money. So we want to treat the condition, which is understanding the psychological and the emotional things, so that we can then deal with the behavioral issues that come out and express themselves as a result. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy. And I think too, that's where our money mindset, our beliefs around money, even if it evolves, it's so deep inside us. I think it's hard to even recognize what are the things that are causing the things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's crazy because it's just such a deeply ingrained, I guess, just mindset, from childhood,
It is. And so to go back to answer your question a little more directly distill that down to the 30-year-old self, like doing this work, like I would just sit there and say, listen, if the Marines and the firemen know that slow is smooth and smooth is fast, they're onto something here with that. The slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And in terms of really growing our business, really being successful at fundraising, really growing the wealth in our life, it starts by doing this deep inner work. You get that nailed down and you're going to fly. But you're going to fly in a way where you don't burn out or sell your soul, right? And so that you can have financial freedom, you can have business success, and also do that with a state of well-being in your life. Those things can coexist, but it does require the starting point of, let me deal with this condition of me first. And then I'm going to go out and do all the things based on knowing who I am and understanding my deeper value and what's happening inside of me. And even the points, the trigger points that I might want to be aware of. Something might trigger this. And now that I know that about myself, now I know I can get some tools and I can do something about this to walk myself through this rather than letting it completely take over or overwhelm me or whatever it might be for that particular person. Right. And so that's the work. That's the work that I do. And I love it. I love it.
That's amazing. It's so funny because I always laugh at golf and people who start golfing. And this was me, that you get out there and you think everyone else on the golf course knows exactly what they're doing and they're really good. And you're the only one who's like terrible and, that kind of thing. And then you realize, anyone who starts, like pretty quickly, you're like, oh, most people on the golf course are not very good. It's really a hard sport. And I feel like money is kind of the same thing. Like, you feel like everyone else has it dialed and figured out.
They don't.
And then it's like, but really everybody, and even at every level, you probably, you have to keep breaking through. I don't know. What's your thought and perspective on that?
Oh, absolutely. So do you remember that game, the Whack-A-Mole, where you right. So I often say, like, if we don't deal with the condition of our relationship with money, it's like we can make more of it. But it can actually end up creating like a little more like these little gophers that pop up everywhere. And we're like banging it like, oh, but it's like, it just will start to express itself in all these other different ways. And so, in terms of business, I had a client years ago who, she was kind of stuck at a cap of like 800,000 in revenue. And so we did some work in her business, kind of more on the strategy and team side, and the revenue management side. And then, she got well over $1 million. She got up to 2 million, but then she started like recognizing, oh, but wait a minute, how I'm being with my team and how I'm relating in terms of the finances here, it's just showing up and expressing over here, which is creating issues over here. So we had to come back and really deal with that condition of her relationship with money. So that then as she was scaling and growing her business, she wasn't continuing to hit all these upper limits. That she could recognize what was happening when it was happening. And of course, we need support and we need continuous levels of self-examination. I mean, really what I'm talking about here is a self-examination process that helps you understand what's happening for you when it comes to money. But, you can have lots of money and the same fear before you had the money of like not having enough money is the same fear you're going to have with the money, but of now losing the money, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the same fear. Do we want to live in this little fear prison for all of our life without money or with money? Sure, one can argue, well, it's better with money. Okay, cool. Sure. Except, I had an interesting conversation with someone who was like, well, people who have money end up becoming more lonely and unwell because they end up separating themselves from the rest of society. I was like, wow, that's interesting. Like, I'm taking us on a whole nother like journey, getting off into that conversation. But she had some valid points to make when she was saying this. And so having more money doesn't solve the problem. right? Like, yes, there is a certain level of having enough money to survive and get our basic needs met. Absolutely. And beyond that point, money doesn't solve our problems. Right? It's not the problem. It's never about the money, ever, ever. It's about what's going on inside of us in relationship to that money and what we're making it mean, and how we're exchanging ourselves with trying to control, or trying to like get into a room, or whatever it is, because we don't understand that we matter enough, we're valuable enough, we are enough. What is enough, just based on our beingness? There's a fantastic 4-part series called Century of the Self. Highly recommend watching this. It's on YouTube, where consumerism, it like really talks about how consumerism was really born. And this man Bernays, who is like considered the father of public relations, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, very famous psychologist, Sigmund Freud, right? And how they use psychological tactics to get people to feel like they didn't have enough, or that they weren't enough, and to buy more as a result. So we had, on a societal level, we've created an environment of not enough story that we have bought into. And so I think us as women can say, wait a minute, stop the bus, take 2. I am enough. This is enough. What is enough in my life? And then how that begins to show up in our relationship with money changes everything. Truly. In our business, in our wealth building, in it all. I could keep going and going and going with you, Jayla, here.
I know, I love it. Well, it's funny. It's such an important point, because I definitely, that's something like recently that I think a lot about. And I went for a walk Monday, it was, with a dear friend of mine. She's raised tons of money, been very successful. And we were talking about how the balance between being content and so thankful, so much to be thankful for, and also wanting more. And what's the reason for wanting more? And what does the more do for you? So I think that's such a fascinating topic. Yeah.
Yeah. And like what's underneath, like that's where I get excited. Like, okay, you say you want more. Why? Tell me why. Like, what's underneath that moreness? Is it coming from some wounded part of you, or is it coming from some like wanting to truly actually be regenerative in some way? And that gets back to like where I was saying earlier, like what is truly our wealthy why?
Yep.
And people, people will say, Jennifer, well, how do I know how much money I need? I'm like, well, tell me about what your wealthy why is, because we got to start there. And most people don't understand what they want. You ask someone what they really want, most people have a really hard time actually expressing what it is that they really want. So if you don't know what you really want, you've got to start coming back to, what do I need? What's happening here so that I can get to what I want and why? And what's underneath all of that is that condition of your relationship with money.
Well, and I think it's so important in that early stage of raising money too, because why do I need this certain amount of money? And because once you do get those investors involved, it's a whole different, then you're on that path. It's hard to just jump off that path and switch, So I think having that upfront question, answered is also so important. And that's something I didn't do well. When I went out to raise money, is like, why do I need this certain amount of money? Yes. Is this going to give me what I want in my life?
Yes.
Or is this just, I more did what I was like told I should do, you know what I mean? Versus what really aligned with my life kind of thing. So yeah, so incredibly important. Well, just super quick to switch. I know you have also coached some Shark Tank entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about real quick, like what you did with them and how that kind of played out.
Yeah. Well, this really segues well into that, because I met these founders. They were two industrial designers who had won a Jello mold competition. And then Diageo and Oprah was like reaching out, wanting to place all these orders. And they're like, we're a design studio. We're not a product company. And so that's where I kind of entered into the scene with them, was like helping them build out the company. And preparing for fundraising. And then they were contacted by Shark Tank. And they were like, hey, you want to come? And they were like, okay. So I ended up preparing them through, and I have this list of 100 questions that you need to be able to answer when you're going out fundraising. And I'm happy to share that with you, so you can share that with, you know, your audience and your community. But it's 100 questions. So we went through this deep process for 3 or 4 months of like being able to answer all these questions and preparing them. I ended up bringing in a bunch of folks. Some of them were some of their other advisors, and we were pretending to be Shark Tank judges and like grilling them and doing the whole thing, right? And we were in New York City at the time, and we flew out here to LA, and I was with them. And the day before they were going on the show, we were in the hotel, and they were just botching it. I mean, we had prepared, they knew all their stuff, they knew their strategy, they knew all the things, but they were completely freaking out, like completely botching it. I was like, okay, come on. We like piled onto the bed. I was like, come on, let's snuggle. Let's a little cuddle puddle here. What's happening? You know, what's going on? and
let's get this out now before we get out there.
Let's get this out. And coming back to this whole point that we've been making this whole time, which is like, money is emotional, right? And so their emotional like all of those emotional voices needed to come out, and they were having fear. They're like, okay, what if we go out there and we end up nailing this? Because they were actually having fear of their greatness, was what was happening. And they're like, what if we go out there and we nail this, and then we have a celebrity investor who comes in and takes over our business? Or what if we get on the stage and they ask us something, but we don't really know how to answer it? You know, and so we took every single one of those fears or those emotional things, and we let it have a voice, and then like just like took it down, and then I gave them some tools. I'm like, okay, well, you know, if a celebrity investor comes in, here's how we're going to do this. Here's how this is going to go down. And if you don't know how to answer a question, take your response and lead them over here. And even anticipate their questions. And here's how you do that. And so they did. Oh my goodness, Jayla, they walked out on that stage that next day. They had 5 sharks fighting for them. It went down as one of the most historic deals in Shark Tank history. They went in, they ended up getting more money than they asked for and a better valuation than they walked in asking for. So it was really kind of ridiculous. Amazing. And Mark Cuban did end up becoming an investor in the business. But, you know, it was really a process for them of deep preparation, but then and also really dealing again with that inner stuff so that they could walk out at stage and have be cleared and feel confident that no matter what happens here, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. And so I think that, you know, whether we're fundraising on Shark Tank or we're fundraising, you know, with angel investors or in whatever way we're doing it, that's the kind of preparation we need to be doing. And it can be super fun. And yes, we need support. Like someone like you know, that's the whole point. Like you're here to help these folks do this and prepare in these ways. And, you know, you ever want to pull me in for any support here, I'm happy to come support you with these folks too. But it's a deep inner work that goes along with the outer preparation from the strategy and the financial preparation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it makes so much sense. Yeah, I know a couple of people right now who are in the Shark Tank process. So I'm gonna ping them with your info because I definitely think it cannot hurt, right? It can only help to have a thought partner and somebody to work through all that stuff with. So very cool. Well, amazing. So tell us a little bit more, about like what you're doing now, where people can find you, and anything else you think would be helpful or want to share.
Sure. Well, you can go to jenniferlove.com, and all the things are there, or Instagram, which is the Jennifer Love. You can hang out with me there. But I have a course that deals with all this. It's real wealth. What is it, and how do I unpack my relationship with money and do this deep inner work? And so it's a self-guided course that you can do. I also run retreats called Dear Money, Let's Talk. And I facilitate you through a process of having a self-conversation with money that really helps you dig into some of these things. And I run those in Santa Barbara here. You can find that information on the Jennifer Love site too. And we've got some exciting things coming next year, some more courses on wealth building and money and time systems. And so we've got some cool stuff that we're launching out too. And then I do some private work with folks. So if anyone's interested in exploring their relationship with money on kind of a private level, I'm happy to explore that with them.
I'm going to do your 2-day retreat since we're both here in Santa Barbara. I can't wait. This stuff is I'm just always hungry to explore and figure out more. And I think that's something that's important. Even if you're the person who thinks I don't have any issues, probably all the more reason to go and dig through and see if you do, right? Because it's just there's always more to figure out and to clear and break through. And
and the reality is we all have a relationship with money, every single one of us. And it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank or don't have, how successful, quote unquote, you are or not, right? This only helps you to feel more centered and to love and enjoy your life in the fullest, most grounded kind of way. So this doesn't have to be just I'm struggling with money financially. No, this is great for those who have the money. But how is it going with relating with family members or business partners, and so this only enhances the relationships that you have that were in all the exchanges in your life too. So great point. Yes.
Yeah. I think too, for me, I want to understand my relationship with money as much as possible, because everything I'm doing, I am passing on to this little 7-year-old,
Amen.
And I think the more that I can understand, any challenges I might have, I can try to help avoid. And I think about this so much. It's well, gosh, you want to teach them to be abundant, but then you don't want them to be spoiled brats. And it's such a fine line, right? So I don't know. I think it's fascinating. So I think anybody that's parents, it's almost do the work, and it will also kind of really help your kids, which is a good thing.
What a beautiful intention, Jayla. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to doing the journey with you.
Yes, me too. It's so fun. We're both here in Santa Barbara. I love it. So
yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been so fun. I am just so happy we connected, and you're doing such amazing stuff. And we'll add all your, info in the show notes so people can go out and find you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.